Our first speaker is a local politician from Portarlington and commentator Elaine Mullally.
Thanks very much, Dean, and thanks very much to the organisers. There's a decent crowd for a July. We're in the thick of summer in Ireland, so it's brilliant to see so many people show up. As Dean said, Elaine Mullally is my name. I'm from Portarlington and I ran in the general elections last November. I put in a good run. I didn't get in, but I'm proud of the messaging that me and my team got out there. So I think it's important, before we get into the crux of has Ireland lost its sovereignty to the EU, I think to bring us up to speed on where we came from, why we joined, etc., and then bring it forward from there. So when we joined the EEC, the European Economic Community, back in 1973, we did so as a small, struggling nation on the western edge of Europe. Our economy was heavily dependent on Britain, particularly for agriculture, and we were in many ways isolated, underdeveloped compared to our European neighbours. Growing up in the 70s and 80s in rural Ireland, it was always drummed into us in school how important the EEC was for Ireland, and great things were going to come about from being part of this great European community. Becoming a member of the EEC was seen as a lifeline, and in many respects it was. It opened up new markets, allowed the free movement of people and goods, and promised economic growth and stability. And indeed, for a time we flourished. Membership brought inward investment, development funds, and new opportunities, particularly during the boom years of the Celtic Tiger. However, that was the EEC, a common market of sovereign states cooperating for mutual economic benefit. But what we are part of today is very different. Over time, the EEC evolved, or perhaps more accurately, was transformed into the European Union, a highly centralised political entity with increasing control over national laws, borders, policies, even values. With each passing treaty, Ireland has handed over more power to Brussels, often without fully realising what was at stake. Take, for example, the Maastricht Treaty, which came into force in 1993, which created the EU as we know it. This was a giant leap towards political union, establishing the euro currency and committing member states to common foreign and security policies. Then came the Amsterdam Treaty in 1999, a further eroding national control over immigration and justice matters. The Nice Treaty in 2003 reformed the EU's structure to allow for enlargement. It changed voting rules and reduced the size of the European Commission, giving more power to larger states and further integrating Ireland into EU decision-making. But perhaps the most controversial is the Lisbon Treaty of 2009, a rebranded version of the failed EU constitution. The Irish people rejected it in a referendum, only to be asked to vote again until the correct result was achieved, as they were with the Nice Treaty several years earlier too. This alone should have raised red flags about democratic integrity. Since then, the pace has accelerated. Let's look at recent developments. In November 2023, the European Central Bank began the rollout of the digital euro, which is a central bank digital currency. On the surface, it sounds modern and efficient. But what does it mean in practice? It means centralised control over your money, programmable currency, and the potential for financial surveillance and restrictions. In everyday terms, it shifts the control of your money over to Europe. So potentially, if at some point they decided in the future that Elaine bought 10 bottles of wine last month, we don't think it's very healthy for Elaine to be drinking 10 bottles of wine, so we're going to restrict how much alcohol Elaine can buy going forward, God forbid. A restriction could be put in place because it's digital and it's controllable by the central bank. The same could be said for things like flights. They may at some point decide, well, we only want people travelling 4 or 5 times a year. They can put carbon credits in place so people could be controlled. Now, I know this sounds a little bit kind of alarmist or exaggerated, but as matters stand, the banks in Australia are considering banning loans for diesel cars to implement their climate policies by force. So something only looks unlikely until it happens once, but once it happens in one country, it generally rolls into more. The ECB is planning on launching this digital euro in October 2025, which is 3 months' time. If we look at what happened in 2020, when the World Health Organization declared a global pandemic, each country was responsible for their own response to this deadly virus, which, let's put facts on the table, had a recovery rate of 99%. The Irish government said in March of 2020 that they would not be recommending the use of face masks. However, by August of 2020, when COVID cases were at their lowest, the Irish government mandated the use of masks. They had clearly received orders from somewhere and were willing to push this and they willingly obliged. The same thing happened with lockdowns, closing businesses, shutting down schools, restricting movements. We were in lockstep with the rest of the world with our restrictions and controls. If we fast forward a few years, something more worrying is currently being planned. The future of our health will be handed over to the World Health Organization, who, with the support of the EU, have prepared a pandemic treaty. This proposes international rules on how nations must respond to future pandemics, and it includes how borders will be managed, how lockdowns will be implemented, and how information is controlled. Again, a serious transfer of power away from elected governments towards unelected global bodies. Next up, in July of 2024, the Irish government opted into the EU Migration Pact. Before I speak about immigration, I think it's worth mentioning here because many people may not be aware of a legal mechanism known as Protocol 21. This protocol, which has been in situ since 1999, when the Treaty of Amsterdam came into force, states that Ireland is automatically opted out of all EU legislation in relation to areas of freedom, security and justice, which includes home affairs and border control. The only way for Ireland to be opted into any proposed legislation in relation to these areas is if an opt-in is accepted by both houses of the Oireachtas. But our government are intent on opting us into as many of these pieces of legislation as possible, as in the 26th of May this year, our Minister for Justice, Jim O'Callaghan, got government approval for his proposal in relation to Protocol 21, where he stated, "It is in Ireland's best interest that we continue to be covered by the terms of Protocol 21, which allows us to opt into new legislative measures on a case-by-case basis. Though I also agree that we must adhere to the undertaking we made to do so to the maximum extent possible. This will demonstrate Ireland's commitment to protecting and strengthening the EU area of freedom, security and justice." So our government are stating here that they are much more interested in protecting the EU in the areas of freedom, security and justice than they are of our own freedoms of security and justice. In relation to immigration, if we look at figures for the last 3 years, according to the CSO, 695,000 people have come into Ireland since 2022. These are made up of returning Irish, asylum seekers, international protection applicants and illegal immigrants. The problem is we don't actually know how many of the people who have come here are illegal because there is no security checks, and so this information is not available to us. We do know from looking around our villages and towns that there are lots of young men who are here for a better life. Thanks to Roderick O'Gorman and his tweet in 8 different languages, inviting the world to come here for all the free stuff. Before our government opted us into the EU Migration Pact, we had no obligation to accept IPASS applicants. We also had some sort of managed immigration and security policy. But as we have now signed into this pact, the EU can determine how many applicants we must accept each year based on our GDP, which is artificially inflated due to many multinationals located here, and our population size, which is considered low compared to many other European countries. And if we fall short or refuse, then we can be fined €20,000 per applicant. So we have gone from a position in Ireland of being able to decide what is best for our people in relation to security and border control, to handing that over to Europe, or else pay the price. This is a serious erosion of our sovereignty, and many would argue that it goes against the will of the Irish people, who overwhelmingly, 79%, voted in favour of the Anchor Baby referendum in 2004, which was intended to change the law on Irish citizenship by ending the automatic right to citizenship for anyone born on the island of Ireland. Apart from all the extra pressure on housing, healthcare, education and a serious wastage of our taxes, there has been a major social contract between the government and the Irish people which has been broken. The people who voted these politicians in to handle our affairs are not listening or engaging, and instead are doing the complete opposite. They are labelling and calling names rather than deal with the genuine concerns of ordinary people across Ireland. The last area I want to discuss, where I believe Ireland has lost its sovereignty, is in the area of free speech. It is worth pointing out here that Ireland opted into the EU proposal to add hate crime to the areas of crime over which the European Parliament may establish minimum rules, offences and sanctions applicable in all EU member states, including Ireland. However, again, by virtue of Protocol 21, Ireland was automatically opted out of such rules. But we've the best ministers in the EU when it comes to giving away our rights. So the then Minister for Justice, Helen McEntee, made sure that good little Ireland opted in, and the opting into the EU Council proposal justified in part the introduction of hate speech and hate crime legislation in Ireland, which has raised real concerns and much national and international debate about freedom of speech. For example, the legislation has no definition of the word hate, so what I might consider hateful, another might find perfectly acceptable, and vice versa. While presented as a domestic initiative, it was heavily influenced by EU directives on online content information control. The Irish government were reading the room last year when they pulled the version of the hate speech legislation that they were planning on pushing through the Dáil, because they knew it would impact negatively on the outcome of the general election. So they withdrew it. However, on the 7th of May this year, the European Commission has given Ireland 2 months to implement the hate speech laws or face being taken to the Court of Justice in the EU. The Commissioner states that under existing rules on combating racism and xenophobia, the European Commission believes Ireland is allegedly failing to comply with laws on race-based violence and hatred. Perhaps the EU's concern about race-based violence and xenophobia is connected to the mass immigration we have witnessed over the last 3 years. They don't want ordinary people asking awkward questions or challenging government in relation to protecting our borders. The hate speech legislation is not really intended to stop the spread of hate. Its intention is to make people self-censor. Stop them commenting online about issues that the government are uncomfortable with, such as immigration and transgenderism. If a person takes offence to a tweet that somebody puts out and reports it as hate crime, they can confiscate all of your work phone and laptop and your children's. Then you have to give them full access to all of the devices, which in itself is going to make you self-censor. You're not going to want strangers taking your property away or your children's property. But can you imagine going to work the next day and telling your boss your phone has been taken, your laptop and your phone has been taken because of a tweet that you put out the evening before? So in summary, I don't believe Ireland is a sovereign state, but I also don't think that the control has necessarily been taken from us. I believe our puppet government literally handed our sovereignty to the EU on a silver platter. The EU are building a European superstate, and Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael are top of the class in relation to grades. I do not believe that this is what the people of Ireland voted for in 1972. And I know that the EU has its advantages, but the financial benefits are costing us a serious amount of our freedoms, as we are one of the very few countries who could have retained our sovereignty in relation to immigration and hate speech, and now any chance we had of controlling our borders or rejecting this ridiculous hate crime legislation has been handed over. The EEC has been transformed, and the reality is we've been trading our independence for handouts for decades, and now the bills are coming due in the form of censorship laws, migration policies, digital currencies, and medical mandates that we didn't ask for, we didn't vote for, and we can no longer refuse. We need a serious national conversation about reclaiming Irish sovereignty. That doesn't necessarily mean leaving the EU overnight, but it does mean demanding opt-outs where available, saying no when necessary, and above all, reasserting the right of the Irish people to govern themselves. Back to the question of the day. Are we at breaking point in relation to losing our sovereignty to the EU? I think we've gone beyond breaking point. We have a Taoiseach who back in 2017 said this: "Let there be no doubt about where Ireland stands. We want nothing to do with the backward-looking idea of sovereignty. We remain absolutely committed to the ideals of the European Union. We see the Union for what it is, the most successful international organisation in world history." What hope have we got if this is the intentions of the leaders of our country? It sums up perfectly that they are more than willing to hand over our sovereignty to Brussels. I think we're at a point of no return. A serious question needs to be asked. If the EU has so much power over us as a nation, then what's the point in electing TDs and senators? Surely they have no purpose, they're just yes men for the EU. At this stage, I see our county councillors as common coordinators, and our TDs have been downgraded to councillors. All the power lies in the hands of Europe. Our relationship with the EU has drastically changed from 1972, from one joining a community to open our economy and attract new investment, to a relationship of control or pay the price. The relationship is dysfunctional and not working for the people of Ireland. We desperately need a new political movement or party, as we can achieve absolutely nothing from the outside. In 2023, I founded a political party, Independent Ireland. The aim of the party was to defend Irish sovereignty and stand up to the increasing overreach of the EU and other global agendas. I worked tirelessly building this party, and last year I was chairperson and director of elections, where we ran 58 candidates in the local elections. A few are here today, and you're very welcome. We got 23 elected, and we also ran 3 strong candidates in the European elections, and I'm delighted to see Eddie Punch is here today. We got 1 elected. As time went on, the party was dragging into a direction that did not align with the values I had envisioned. I was faced with a choice: stand by my principles and integrity, or stay in a party that was becoming a victim of its own success, and was no longer aligned with my values and beliefs. I chose integrity. I stepped away from my position as chairperson, and I walked away. But I haven't walked away from the cause. I believe now more than ever that the only way to change the trajectory we're on, a trajectory towards digital currency, our finances and health, cultural dilution, and legislative overreach, is through the birth of a new movement, one that is rooted in national sovereignty, truth, freedom, and real democracy. It's time to build something new, something bold that puts Ireland and its people first, because I firmly believe that united we stand, divided we fall. Thank you.